My name is Gianni Russo, a.k.a. Carlo, the infamous son-in-law from The Godfather. I'm now known as the Hollywood Godfather, and this is my story.
Before all of the wins in my portfolio, I was a little boy diagnosed with polio. Experimenting with cures, I tried every one. Felt everything in my right, but my left was numb. Walking with a limp, like will I ever run? Once again, or is this it? Am I forever done? Living in the hospital was never fun. Some people were cool, but not everyone.
On January 15th, 1947, the city of Los Angeles was sent into a panic after the body of 22-year-old Medford, Mass. Native Elizabeth Short was found surgically bisected at the waist, drained of blood, and bizarrely mutilated on a vacant lot. This infamous murder inspired the largest manhunt in LAPD history and captured national headlines. But police investigators failed to capture the identity of the person responsible for her murder, for whom the media called the Black Dalhia. Our guest this week is retired LAPD homicide detective Steve Hodel, who has worked on more than 300 murder cases and has achieved one of the highest solve rates on the force during his 25 years as an LAPD detective. After he retired, he launched his own investigation into the Black Dalhia murder, which led him to a shockingly unexpected perpetrator. His own father, Dr. George Hodel, is also author of the Black Dalhia Avenger, as well as many other books on this fascinating murder. Retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel joins us. Steve, first of all, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Steve, that's an amazing intro. Jeez.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. I am a crime junkie, and I have been for so long. I grew up watching Gianni on the Rockford Files. So telling my age, but
that was fictitious crime, fortunately.
Well,
I think you're the youngest one here, Jeannie.
Well,
So, Steve, for everybody, people that don't know your background, give a little brief description of your background real quick.
Born in Los Angeles, joined the Navy at 17 for 4 years, got out, and back then we're talking about in the early 60s. And, a young white male, what do? They become a cop. So I joined LAPD in 63, went through the academy, basically did 5 years in uniform patrol. And then I graduated to detectives, worked all the tables, sex crimes, juvenile, burglary, robbery, and then eventually, moved over to homicide.
Now, you did the Manson murders. Did you do the Manson murders?
No, they were on our watch, but downtown LA, I was assigned to Hollywood division. I think on the East Coast, you call them precincts.
Okay.
But I was assigned to one of the 18 divisions, Hollywood homicide. And basically, I stayed at Hollywood for 17 years, had over 300 murder investigations, did have one of the highest solve rates in the city, but it wasn't just me. It was kind of an esprit de corps. We had a great bunch of guys there, 3 or 4 of us. And then basically retired in 86 and moved north to Bellingham, Washington. And took my kids. I had boys were about 6 and 8, something like that. Moved up there and basically I got a PI license, was doing defense work. Went to the dark side, as Connolly would say, and worked primarily crime defense for criminal cases. And basically, my dad had, and to understand the story, we have to kind of go into heavy biographics on my father, but to really understand it. But basically, he moved back from Asia in 1990 to San Francisco, and I was close to my father, as he wasn't a warm fuzzy, but I was as close as you could be. And I'd go down to see him in San Francisco. He'd come up to Bellingham. So
now, he was a surgeon. What kind of a doctor was he?
He was a medical doctor, and then he had an MD, but in his early days, he was a surgeon. He worked at a logging camp, did soul surgeon there, and then got into kind of VD, was his specialty, and became the head of LA County Health Department.
Did you say, what'd you say you just specialized in?
Venereal disease control.
I thought maybe I missed, okay.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
wanted
so
to make
he-
sure.
Oh, you know why? We've never experienced that. That's why we.
That's right. Never heard of it, so.
Well,
Thank
you know,
you. I just want to clarify.
yeah, well, we're talking about talking about the 1940s. He was there. So from, he actually from the 1920s forward, he was in LA, Hollywood. He got his MD in 36. George Hill Hodel was born in Los Angeles too, downtown, basically 5th and Main near there, right near the Biltmore. He was an only child. His parents, he lived in Pasadena, South Pasadena. He was highly gifted. His IQ was 186, 1 point above Einstein. Incidentally, that skips a generation, so my boys are in good shape. Basically, high IQ, blew all of his fellow students out of the water in everything. Basically, was a piano prodigy, played piano concerts at the Shrine Auditorium at the age of 9. Was taken in Madame Montessori school. His mother took him over to Europe. He went to Madame Montessori's for a year, came back, and basically went through South Pasadena High School, entered Caltech at the age of 15. Not only was he a musical prodigy and highly intelligent, he was also very sexually precocious or advanced for his age, let's say. And he had an affair with a professor's wife at Caltech, and she got pregnant. And
I like this guy already.
yeah,
I'm
and
sorry.
we haven't even got into his life yet.
Yeah, I'm starting to see why he was specialized in VD.
Exactly. He really was obsessed with sex, and basically got into she broke up her marriage. She goes back east to right in the Boston area. He goes back, says, "I love you. I want to marry you." The woman looks at him and says, "George, you're a child yourself. Get out of my life."
Wow.
He comes back and basically is kicked out of Caltech for the scandal. He gets a fake ID and he passes himself off at 21, as he's 17 now. And he gets a job as a cabbie, and he's driving out of the Biltmore downtown. Strangely enough, one of his fellow cab drivers is a young guy going to law school by the name of William H. Parker, who will become our most famous police chief, William Parker, later on. Anyway, George gets a job as a young cub reporter for the LA Record, which was a prominent newspaper. And he starts writing these tabloid crime reports. He's riding around with LAPD Vice. They're kicking doors and they're arresting the judge with a young blonde and writing these tabloid stories. Then he graduates and starts writing around with LAPD Homicide and writes, again, tabloid stories about the bloody ace of spade next to the body, that sort of thing. And so basically he's buddies with it. And Gianni, you may know, I don't know if you ever had any contact with John Huston, the famous film director.
Of course I did.
Did you?
His
Okay.
daughter, Angelica, all of them. Shit.
Yeah.
No,
I
love John Huston.
He was one of the greatest.
Gianni, wasn't he the one that picked up the tailor? What was his name? We did a podcast about him just recently. And he was
AJ Pratt.
AJ Pratt. Do you know that?
Yeah, he hired AJ Pratt as the wardrobe.
He picked him up at the side of the road.
Yep.
Really?
Wow.
Anyway, so John is now back then in the 20s, John is close friends with Dad. George and John are buddies, and they're double dating. And at that time, John was just the son of a famous actor, Walter Huston, his father, who was doing stage and screen. And so George and John are double dating, and George is dating a woman by the name of Dorothy, and John is dating a woman by the name of Emilia. A couple of weeks go by, and John falls in love with Dorothy, so they switch. John and Dorothy run off to Greenwich Village over on your guys' side of town, and
Wow.
basically get married. And they're married for 7 years. Their marriage breaks up. Dorothy comes back, hooks back up with George, who's now who basically, well, before they hook back up, Emily and George have an affair, and she gets pregnant. And they go north, and he enters pre-med at Berkeley. Then he goes across to UCSF and gets his medical degree at San Francisco. And they have a child. They have 2 children. They have a child in 1928, and then they have a Duncan, and then they have a Tamar comes along in 35, a girl. So anyway, he leaves her. He goes and starts doing surgery at a logging camp in New Mexico. And anyway, eventually, I won't go through all the details, but he comes back to LA. Dorothy breaks up with John. They hook back up. And my older brother Mike is born in 39. I come along in 41. And my younger brother Kelly's 42. Dad's joined LA County Health. He quickly rises to the top, becomes head of LA County Health, specializing in venereal disease. And he buys a famous, now you guys may be familiar with the Souden House, which is a kind of a Mayan-looking temple in Hollywood.
Very eccentric looking house.
Yeah, it was built by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr., Lloyd Wright. Anyway, it's this Mayan temple in the heart of Hollywood. It looks like a set.
It looks like the one from the House on Haunted Hill, the Vincent Price movie. Looks sort of like that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know. I don't know. I think that was another one. That was in San Francisco. Anyway, we all moved. So we're the 3 little princes. Mom's the queen and Dad's the king, and we all move into this house in Hollywood. Everything's going fine until 1949, and there's a knock on the door, and it's LAPD, and Dr. Hodel, yes, you're under arrest for incest.
Oh, shoot.
So they arrest, yeah. Remember Tamar was born? Well, she's 14. She came down that summer of 49. And basically, he had a sex party with her and about 4 other adults. They all kind of, it was a kind of a, swapping. And anyway, he gets arrested. And there's a big trial and a scandal. And he gets Jerry Geisler, who was kind of the Johnny Cochran of that day.
Yeah, he worked for a lot of the studios back then. They used to say, get Geezer. Guy, what is his name?
Get me Jerry, get me Geisler. Yeah, exactly. He represented all the stars. Marilyn Monroe, Robert Mitchum, all of them.
Johnny Stompanato there. What's her name? The actress.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Laura, what's her name?
our daughter killed Johnny, in fact.
Yes, the one that killed Johnny Stompanato there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, didn't they develop a new dance, the Stompanato Stomp? That's where the girls cut in. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, that's terrible.
Lana Turner.
There we go.
Yep.
Oh,
Lana
drive me
Turner, yeah.
nuts.
Crank it up once in a while.
Yeah, so Dad has a trial. It's a 3-week trial, and Dad basically Jerry Geisler paints Tamar as a pathological liar. Even though they had 3 adults present during the sex acts. And anyway, he beats the case. Later, we'll find out there was a payoff. So Dad is we're now into 1950. Dad splits the country and goes to Asia, reinvents himself as a market researcher, marries a wealthy Filipina, and has 4 more kids, breaks up with that marriage after 3 or 4 years, hooks up with his secretary, a young Japanese woman, June. They get married, they come back to LA, move to San Francisco, fast forward 10 years. I see him for that last 10 years. We become close. He dies. Okay. So I go down and do all the things you have to do when a father passes. And I'm talking to June, and she says, I think your father would want you to have this. She gives me a small album. I open the album, and it's got photographs of my mom and us boys, and I'm going through it, and here's a semi-nude reclining young woman with dark hair. And I said to June, who's this? She says, I don't know, somebody your father knew from a long time ago. And to this day, Gianni, I have no idea why Black Dahlia came to mind, but it kind of came into my mind and passed out, and that was it.
Wow.
And it just left. 2 or 3 days later, I'm on the phone to Tamar, who is now living in Hawaii, and I haven't talked to her in 50 years. You know, she went her way. She kind of spun out, became best friends with Michelle Phillips and the Mamas and Papas, and they did the whole San Francisco scene and sex, drugs, rock and roll. And I kind of went another direction. And anyway,
Thank
we're
God.
talking about this great man and his remarkable life. And I'm on the phone with her, and she, out of nowhere, she says, well, you know, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. And I'm saying, where in the F is this coming from, Tamar? What are you talking about? Like I said, I've had maybe 20 minutes of conversations in 20, 50, 40 years with her. Anyway, she says, yeah, he didn't do it. But when they were taking me to trial on the incest, the officer said they believed he killed the Black Dahlia. I said, no way. I'll be able to show he had nothing to do with this in 10 minutes. So I start getting into it. And I didn't know a lot about the Black Dahlia murder. I knew it was a famous unsolved from the 40s, but I was in the 60s and moving forward. I didn't really much care about the 40s. And we'd seen the photos at the police academy going through, and that was it. I didn't even know her name, Elizabeth Short. So I start getting into it, and basically it all comes together. I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been doing it for 17 years as a homicide detective. The evidence all falls in place, and I go in secret to the head DA down there, a guy named Steve Kay, who was co-counsel with Bugliosi on the Manson case, Mike.
Yeah, he's still around.
And he reviews it, and he says, you know, based on your evidence and all of your findings, I would file 2 counts of murder. And the second shock was he was a serial murderer. There were about a dozen lone woman murders unsolved, and I make a case for about 10 of them.
Wow.
Yeah, and
So your own father was
Our own
involved in
dad.
10 other murders.
say again.
So your dad was involved in 10 other murders?
Yes, at least 10, and that started the rabbit holes. And basically, he came back and said, "Well, I would file on 2 of these murders, and I would win them in court." He says the others, you're probably right, but he says there's not quite enough evidence. So with that, basically, I said, okay, well, I'll go ahead and publish the book. I'll write it up and publish it. So I came out in 2003 with a book, and you know, all the shows, did all the television interviews and all that, and basically did a presentation to LAPD, and I and Steve Kay, this DA, did, showing him it was a dead bang case on him, and basically that's where it went for a couple of years, and then the proverbial stuff hit the fan, and we discovered that there was a secret file in the DA, locked away in the DA's safe, that got opened, and we discovered he was the prime suspect all along.
Wow.
His name did it. They bugged his house for 6 weeks. They got confessions from him, tape recorded confessions from him. You know, he says, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now. My secretary's dead. And he killed his secretary, and he was investigated for that years early. Anyway, there's just too much to go into on detail, but basically the tape recordings, and there were payoffs to the police. And you got to understand, LAPD back then was very corrupt. I mean, the East Coast, Chicago, New York, they were all really very corrupt back then. And
Yeah, it was like a real life LA Confidential, you know.
more than we know, you know. It's my sister, no, it's my daughter, it's my son. Anyway, so
So, but
basically,
he when you found out, he already died.
oh yeah, none of this started until he died. I had no clue. I was close to my father. You know, none of this, once he died and I started looking at it to show he had nothing to do with it. That's when everything started opening up.
Well, let's touch on that a minute. I mean, that in itself had to be a shock. Here's a guy who's your father. You thought you knew him. You were close to him. Could you share some of that with our audience?
Yeah. Gianni, I've been through every possible emotion you can think of. Anger, hatred, depression. Initially I said that it wasn't possible. And so you got two things. You got the son who loves his father, right? And his father was very mysterious. A lot of this stuff I had no idea until I got into the investigation. So you got a loving son who's pursuing and wanting to know more about his mysterious father. He was never a warm fuzzy, but he was always large and in charge, and he had this beautiful speaking voice, kind of like Richard Burton. And he was a handsome. Women were, madly in love with him. Every woman he ever met fell in love with him. And he was a married 5 women, 11 children, so he had all of this charisma and charm. And then there was the cop, the trained homicide investigator on the other side, who was pursuing and trained and knowing what he's doing to follow a case. So I had this parallel investigation going on that took me 3 years before I made my case. And I was sure I was going to clear him, and I made the mistake of following the evidence. And it took me in 180 degrees in the opposite direction.
Oh, that hadn't. I didn't realize you thought he was innocent.
Absolutely.
Well, you were trying to disprove him.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I said, there's no way. I mean, Dad had his faults, and mostly it was sex. And I definitely knew that on the with Tamar, the sex and the incest occurred. There was no doubt in my mind. But a horrific torture, kidnap, torture, murder, and I've had 300 cases, and I've never had a case that even came close to the extended torture and the things that were done to Elizabeth Short. So I was sure that he was totally incapable of doing something like that.
So for our
What I
audience,
found out was he was a supreme sadist and misogynist, a misanthrope. He hated society. All of this was about revenge and anger. And he's the one that called it the Black Dalhia Avenger. He was taunting the press. He was sending in notes, which handwriting I recognized as my own father's. I mean, your parents' handwriting.
yeah.
I know my parents' handwriting. And that was one of the things that was a real shocker, was when he sent in at least a dozen notes on the Dahlia case. And
Mike, hold your thought up. Well, let's go to the commercial break a minute. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Steve, this is an amazing and probably one of the messiest stories we ever had on our show. Thank you. 1 second. We'll be right back.
Sure, absolutely.
Don't go nowhere. We know where you live.
Oh, okay.
I just want to tell my fans out there, on April 13th and 14th, I'll be at the DoubleTree Hilton in Fairview at a new convention that I'll be at the first one, and so far 6 more to come, called Paisano Con. We finally got an Italian convention going. It's for 2 days. There's going to be more oil and garlic over that convention, and you can't believe it. Make sure you show up. Remember, April 13th, 14th at the DoubleTree Hilton in Fairview. Just go there, get the information, or go on paisancon.com. Okay, thank you. All right, we're back.
Okay, we're back.
All right.
You want me to talk a little bit about Elizabeth Short, the victim?
Wait.
I
Okay,
think Mike
talk about
had
her
a
then.
question for you.
Oh,
Sure.
go ahead. Steve. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
Steve, I'm dying. Just can we please announce? I listened to Root of Evil. Fantastic. I was just fascinated, and I love when I'm looking at those or listening to those podcasts. I'm always stopping to Google what the house or this or that. And what was your first clue that?
1 second.
Yeah, so I Am the Night came out, which was a series with Pine and I forget the actress's name. But anyway, it was a 4, 5, or 6 part series, and it was supposedly about the Black Dahlia stuff. Well, I didn't know anything about it until I saw the trailer. I had nothing to do with it. It was made by I'm blanking on who's the superwoman that made the Superwoman, the director, producer. Anyway, she was I'm blanking on her name, but anyway, it came out and it was 95% fiction. So they approached me and they said, we're doing this Root of Evil show, 10-part series. And we need you we want to do the truth. And I said, I don't want any part of it. It's all I said, no, we're going to do the real deal. Finally, the producer convinced me to take part in it, which I did, and I'm really glad.
I hope with money too, though.
It set the record straight for the most part. And it was 95% true. So Root of Evil came out, and it was very well done. And but there are a lot of myths about the Black Dahlia. There's a reason why it's LA's most notorious case. And there are 3 myths. One was the missing week. The legend goes that she was dropped off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA, and they saw her leave out the front door into the fog, and she was gone for 9 days until her body appeared on a vacant lot, severed in half. She was surgically bisected. That's the first myth that I dispose of, which there was no missing week. I came up with 14 witnesses that saw her every day of that week, published in the papers.
Hey, correct me if I'm wrong. There was also another myth that she came out, like a lot of beautiful women back then, came out to Los Angeles to become an actress. Was she an actress or no?
No, okay. She was never involved in that. That's a big myth too, that she was never involved in pictures. What it was back then, some of the guys hitting on her said, hey, you're beautiful, you ought to be in pictures. But it wasn't her. She was basically a rather naive 24-year-old young lady during the war that wanted to marry and fall in love with Lieutenant Wright and live happily ever after. And she had some psychological problems of her own. She tended to lie a bit and stuff, but basically she was a Medford girl that just wanted to fall in love and live happily ever after.
My hometown, that's where I grew up.
Yeah, great.
Where'd you grow up?
Same town as the Black Dahlia, Medford, Massachusetts.
Which?
Medford, Massachusetts.
Oh, Medford, Massachusetts. Okay.
There's actually a big stone right where her house used to be for the Black Dahlia down there. Pretty cool.
Yeah. So the second myth was that it was a standalone murder, none before and none after. I present a dozen cases that were related. It was a serial crime. There's no doubt about that. And the third myth is the case was never solved. And that's the biggie, because what I discovered was that there were high-ranking LAPD and DA's officers that solved it. They identified George Hodel, and they locked it away and hid it. And you say, why would they do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, he was what they called a high jingo back then. Gianni, have you ever heard that term, high jingo? It's basically untouchable.
Oh.
A guy that's got so much stuff on so many people that he's untouchable. And George was a high jingo.
Oh, George was, okay.
Yeah, he had performed abortions for, which was illegal, and you went to prison for 5 years back then. He had performed abortions for the police guys and their girlfriends that got in trouble.
Okay, so he had stuff on other people.
He did. He had a lot of stuff on a lot of people. And then we also learned, once we get into the secret DA Hodel tapes, that there were payoffs to the DA's office during the trial and prosecution and stuff. And so basically, that's kind of it. She was, there were a lot of myths about her, most of which were not true. She was not a druggie. She didn't drink. She was just basically a simple girl from Medford, Mass, and a lot of books have painted her as a prostitute and giving sex in back alleys, all BS.
So how many books and TV shows were you directly involved in about this subject?
A lot. Basically, once the book came out, it became a New York Times bestseller. So, it was kind of headlines because it was so notorious here in LA. And I did, kind of all the circuit, the TV stuff.
Were you the sole author?
Yes, I'm the sole author.
You have the new book out now, Steve.
I do. So basically I've written 9 books, and they're all kind of like one ongoing homicide investigation. In other words, adding more and more evidence to not only the Black Dahlia, but other crimes all over. And what I discovered was, and well, I knew this as I was going into it, Dad didn't start in the 1940s and wake up one morning and say, I think I'll be a serial killer. He started as a teenager and never stopped. So I published the early years, his crimes in the 20s. Part 2 is the book 2 is the 30s, and then all of these in the 40s. And then I've just come out in November with Black Dalhia Avenger 4, which was my first adventure into, let's call it, say, historical fiction. Everything is true. All the facts are true, but what I do is I wanted to give a voice to the victims. You know, all of the murdered victims never had a voice. They never had a chance to speak out. So what I did was I made a trial by the quick and the dead, and I put it in the Hall of Justice in downtown Los Angeles. And basically, I don't know if you can see this or not. Let's see. Can you see this?
Oh, yeah.
And basically, I did an audiobook and ebook and print book. And BDA 4 it's a trial. We put George on trial for his crimes. And we bring back the witnesses from the other side. And we have a ghost judge and we have a ghost prosecutor. And some living, I'm the investigator for the prosecutor, so I'm alive. I think. Am I alive still? Tell me. I'm still
very
vertical,
much
right?
alive.
Okay. And I bring in some living witnesses and bring in all of the victims to testify about their crimes, what he did. So for me, it was a lot of fun, actually.
In jail?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think and I pretty much include all of the evidence from the other books. So basically, it was actually, I wanted to give the victims a voice, and I couldn't figure out any way to do it other than this. And I think it works pretty good. I'm real happy with it.
And when did it come out?
November. So
just started.
how's it doing in sales, though?
Say again.
How is it doing in sales?
Well, I self-published this because it's a long book, and if you go to one of the big publishers, what happens is they cut it down to 480 pages, and they would cut that down to 250 to 300. You know, they see the dollar signs. So that's one of the reasons I did it. I didn't do this to make money. I did this to get the truth out there. And I'm not going to be around forever, so I wanted to document as much as I could and speak for the victims.
Steve, if I can ask you, go ahead, Jeannie.
I just wondered where they could get those books, where our audience can.
Amazon.
Amazon. Perfect.
Yeah, Amazon. And the audiobook is amazing. It's narrated by a guy named Malcolm Hillgartner, and he is the best. He's done about 4 or 5 of my books, and it's not a narration; it's a performance. Wow. And he really brings it alive. So I would highly recommend the audiobook. Print book's great too because it's got all the photos, which you're not going to get on the audio. Wow. So buy the audio or buy the audio and listen to it with the print book. And
Steve, real quick, I want to circle back on how much time we have left.
Yeah.
Can you take our audience back to January 15th, 1947, and real quick explain what you think happened between your dad and her, how it came about, real quick.
Well, we know hours before she was murdered, a policewoman from downtown, working a footbeat downtown LA, sees her come out with 2 men and a woman. And she had had prior contact with her earlier in that day, a few hours before, where she came running out and said, a man's threatened to kill me. And they went back got her purse, and the man was gone. So this was the second contact with her, and she sees her and she goes over and says, are you all right? And she says, yeah, I'm going to meet my dad at the bus depot, which was just a few blocks away. So she's seen with these 2 men and a woman. That's the last she's seen. And from there, they go to the Franklin house, and basically it's extended torture for 4 hours. And it's beyond horrific. I've never had a crime scene I've never had a crime that comes anywhere close to it. And I don't know if you want me to go into the details or not,
But only a doctor could surgery. So he didn't cut the bone. There was no bones cut.
the procedure is actually an operation called a hemicorporectomy. And they knew from the get-go that it had to be a highly skilled surgeon because it's the only way you can go through. I have a picture here of it, but it's the only way you can go through the body without sawing through bone. And there was no severing, there was no, they knew that it had to be a scalpel and that it was a professional job. So that limits your suspect pool right there. The fact that it's a surgeon, a skilled surgeon.
And no blood on the scene, right? Is
Say
that right?
again?
There was no blood on the scene as well?
Right, all the blood had been drained in the
That's
bath,
funny.
in the bathtub in our home, and the two parts were transported on cement sacks, paper sacks, large cement sacks. And I was actually able to link the cement sacks to our home by receipts I found in Frank Lloyd Wright Jr.'s file. He had a file on Hodel, and in that, on 3 days before the murder, these cement sacks were purchased for some repairs at the Franklin house.
So what was your first clue that you thought, oh no, this wasn't what I was expecting?
Well, I guess it was the handwriting, which was published on the front page. The note that said, I'm turning myself in on January 29th, had my fun at the police, signed Black Dalhia Avenger. And that handwriting was undisguised, and it was hand printing, very unusual printing that I recognize as my father's. So that was the first thing, but I said, no, there's got to be some other explanation. It can't be. So that was the first and of many.
How long had you been dead when you started this investigation and realized it was him?
Well, it was just a few days when Tamar said he was the suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. That phone call was like 2 days after he died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that started me on it, and I spent the next 3 years pursuing it.
Yeah, hard to mourn your dad while you're finding all of this stuff, thinking, what have I stumbled into?
Well, it probably gave him the energy to go try to prove him innocent.
Exactly.
At first.
Yeah. I mean, I really was. I'm confident that I would be able to establish his innocence. So it's been a hell of a journey, and it's been 9 books, and I've just recently moved from Los Angeles, my hometown, up to Birch Bay, Washington, which is kind of the northwest corner of the United States. I'm about 6 miles from the Canadian border. And I got myself a little dog now.
Are you a fugitive? Are you leaving us?
Yeah.
Well, my two sons, one lives in Seattle, one lives in Bellingham, and they say, Dad, come on, it's time to stop. You're 82 years old. And I said, okay, maybe you're right.
So, I get that. I'm 81, and they keep telling me, why do you keep doing what I'm doing? Because we have fun with it. What else are we going to do?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm there may be one more book, but I'm trying not to do it, but I enjoy it up here. It's very, very different from LA. And,
oh my God, yeah.
Steve, if you ever want to get rid of that Maltese Falcon behind you, I'm your guy.
Did I tell you that's one of the original? No.
That's fine.
I wish. Yeah. Well, and that's the other amazing connection. The Maltese Falcon. You know who designed that? Dad's best friend and an accomplice in some of his murders, a guy by the name of Fred Sexton, who was friends with John and George back then. And Houston had him design that. And he made that. He was an artist, and he made that for Maltese Falcon. I think they made about 5 or 6 of them.
Gianni, did you both of you, Steve and Gianni, did you ever hear this story about John Huston back when he was coming up as a director? Clark Gable was a massive star, big box office draw. So Clark Gable was drunk one night and he got in a car accident. He killed somebody. So they called, they called Giesler at the studios, whatever they had, whoever they called, and they got John Huston to sit in as the driver. So we'll give you some big directing jobs. So he took the rap because he was like a young kid back then. So Clark Gable couldn't take the pinch. If you look that up, that's a true story.
Really? I mean, I was aware of John's accident and killing somebody, but I never heard the other connection.
Yeah, Clark Gable. I'm sorry, Cary Grant. No, I'm sorry, Clark Gable. I always get it mixed up. Clark Gable. Clark Gable.
Now you
Really?
got me confused. Who did it?
Sorry.
Okay,
Clark,
who did it?
Clark Gable. Yeah, because he
Clark
was
Gable.
drunk one night and he killed somebody. And they had him take the rap for him because, you know, he was an up and coming director. And they said, listen, you
The
take.
studio will do anything.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, they were really dirty back then.
Oh, they were.
I'll give you a little anecdote on my mother. So she's married to Houston for 7 years, right? And he's
Your
filming.
mother was married to
Wait a
John
minute.
Huston?
Yeah, for 7 years.
Oh
And-
my God, this is
You
insane.
missed slipping that in. Now back up. She was married to who?
John Huston.
Your
John
mother?
Houston. She was John's first wife. They were married 7 years. And remember they ran off to Greenwich Village as a double
Oh,
dating.
you didn't.
Oh,
you
right.
didn't
Okay.
mention his last name. You said she ran up with John.
John.
yeah.
John
Sorry.
Huston.
Yeah. So
Wow.
anyway, here's the story. He's filming Treasure of Sierra Madre. And there's that scene with a little boy who turns out to be Robert Blake, right? The little Mexican boy.
Right.
And they're filming that and the lottery tickets and stuff. And John goes to Dorothy and he says, you know, the dialogue sucks. You got 3 young boys that age, Dorothy. Will you write it? Well, Mom was a screenwriter. And so she wrote that scene in the lottery in the bar. And he says, that's it. That's perfect. And she never got credit for it, but she wrote that.
So much great history of, I mean, so many things. Jesus.
Yeah, there are. It's just, you know, if you went to some director with this and said, and laid it out to him, just kind of like in a 3-minute pitch, they'd say, get the F out of here. You know, this guy's insane, you know. And
You have to have a whiteboard going to keep
Like
up
it's like
with
Forrest
everybody.
Gump. Forrest Gump meets the world.
oh God.
So how many half brothers and sisters did you end up with? Because George was
11, he
big
said.
that.
Yeah,
11?
well, so their dad fathered 11 children, and I had 2 full brothers. And actually, I was a twin, but John, some call him Gianni, but John didn't make it. He lived 3 weeks and died. Yeah, and we were in incubators. We were like 3-pound babies. Can you believe that? Anyway, so 2 full brothers, and the rest were half brothers and half sisters.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
It's an incredible story.
Thank you so much for coming on, man. We have to have you on again. I'm sure we could
Yeah,
talk
Well, it's-
hours on.
He goes
It's a
back.
pleasure.
It goes back to the Zodiac Killer. There's so much stuff going on. Just Google Steve Hodel. Go to Amazon. Check out his books. It's a fascinating story. It gets deeper and deeper. You know, you just can't get enough of it. It's amazing. So you should be commended for what you did. And so thank you for bringing it on our show.
Well, thanks a lot. Been a pleasure talking with the 3 of you.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's amazing that you had the courage to out your dad after you were going to prove him innocent. And then after you found all that, to be able to go, all right, I'm going to just tell the truth instead of covering that up.
Well, that's what I did for 25 years, and I wasn't going to change.
Well, it's fantastic.
Thank you for sharing it. And we appreciate you coming on. And you're welcome to come on anytime you'd like.
Thanks a lot.
Mike's number, and please.
I appreciate it.
Don't forget the Falcon.
Don't forget what? The Falcon.
Don't forget the Falcon behind.
Okay.
Pleasure
All right.
meeting you.
Thank you.
so
Bye,
much.
Steve. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. It was another great episode of Hollywood Godfather podcast. I want to thank Jeannie first, the lady. Mike, our new co-host, thank God you joined us. And this is what's coming up, man. So you send your cards and letters, some requests for new shows. Obviously, we have an encyclopedia of cinema history now with us, the Hollywood Kid.
Yeah. So guys, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the thumbs up button. That's what we need. We need audience involvement. Write your letters. Go to HollywoodGodfatherPodcast.com. Answer questions. Johnny's an almanac of Hollywood history. I mean, it's amazing. So anything can get answered from Gianni or Jeannie or myself.
And you, how about you? Are you leaving
Myself,
yourself?
yeah. I gotta try myself. I'm trying to be modest, you know, but screw that. No money in modesty. You know?
No, hello.
So
Hey,
that's
and
it.
don't forget. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish
Oh,
up.
that's it. Just spread the word out there on social media. Share our stuff. Tell your family. Tell your friends. Tell all your enemies. We're here every Wednesday.
That's exactly. And another thing is you can share the episodes. Just look for the button. You can share whether it be podcast or on YouTube. So share it amongst your friends. And that was a fascinating story. And if you've ever, you learn a little more every time. And I'll tell you the first time I ever heard him.
I knew you liked that one, Jeannie. I know you're a true
Oh, thank you. You know, it's right up my alley. I loved it. What a great time. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all. And we're going to say goodnight. God bless and stay safe.
Good night. Mwah. Thank you.
I say that.
And that was that. But I'll be back.
No regrets, no complaints. Lived a life with no restraints. The little kid they all counted out, proved them all wrong, that's without a doubt. Laying there with my left side numb, 5-year bout with polio, but yes, I won. From standing on corners like how many pens you want to living in a bakery, then opening my own restaurant. Of course, I had some help along the way, friends like Frank Costello that I miss each and every day. Things from many years ago still resonate.